Great. Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm delighted to welcome you all to this evening's webinar. Thanks. If anybody has already started introducing yourselves in the chat, that's great. If not, please do so. We are going to just do a really brief go-around introduction, I think, of tonight's speakers before I start my very brief presentation, just so everybody knows who's who. So maybe could we maybe just start with Karen and then Philip and then Holly? Is that okay?
Yep. Good evening, everyone. So I'm Karen Fisher and I work for the Soil Association. I'm a farming advisor on their farm and land use team.
Great. Thanks, Karen. And Philip?
Hey folks, my name is Philip Sheane. I'm a farmer in Fife. Grew up in Ireland on a farm. Came to Fife via a long journey through Canada. Lived and worked there on a farm, on my own farm for about 15 years, and decided to come back to Europe and landed in Fife. So here we are.
Great, thanks, Philip. And Holly, if you'd like to do a really brief intro as well, that'd be great.
Hi everyone, my name's Holly and I am a grower. I work also at East Nook Market Garden in Fife, and I'm also a Future Resilience Seed Coordinator for the Gaia Foundation's Seed Sovereignty Programme.
Great. Okay, cool. Thanks so much, everyone. I'm going to start sharing my screen and just do a really brief introduction to our... Can everyone see that? Yeah, is that good? Cool. So, welcome. Thanks very much. And yeah, I'm sure everyone's looking forward to hearing what everyone's got to say. I'm going to do a brief introduction to the whole farm plan requirements and how soil health fits into that. So if you just bear with me. This is the agenda, the running order for this evening. So as you can see, I'm only going to do this boring bit for 5 minutes, and then we'll crack right on to Karen, who's going to talk about soil analysis. Then we'll move on to Philip and then Holly and have questions. There's space for questions at the end of each presentation, so we won't forget them, but there's also a wee bit of time at the end for any final questions. Okay, so basically from 2025, lots of you will already know there's been a new requirement for all farms and crofts in receipt of basic payment scheme payments to complete a whole farm plan to help identify ways to make farms and crofts more efficient, productive and profitable. And we've been running a project called Planning for Change for the last 18 months, funded by the Scottish Government's Knowledge Transfer and Innovation Fund, to share information about what this means and how to get ready for it. But our focus really has been to say, these are some things that you have to do, but actually they can be really positive things for your farm or croft, not just a sort of tick box exercise. So there's 5 elements to the whole farm plan, as you can see there. So we've got soil analysis, which is the focus of our evening. There's also the carbon audit, habitat survey, integrated pest management plan, and animal health and welfare plan. And we've been doing lots of sessions, both online and in person on various different farms across Scotland, looking at all of these topics in detail. And actually this project is coming to an end at the end of this month. So there's loads and loads of resources and information on our website, which Karen's got the links for to put in the chat. So please do have a look at those technical guides and case studies and videos and previous webinars on all of these topics, because they're there. That's what they're there for. So obviously today we're looking at the soil health column, and the general idea is that doing regular soil analysis should give you, benchmarking data to improve soil health on your farm or croft, as well as productivity and biodiversity, and importantly, to reduce inputs where those are being used. So this is taken from the FAS webpage, the Farming Advisory Service. The link is at the top there and also will be in the chat later as well. But basically, not everyone has to do soil tests. Basically, if the field is permanently managed, if it's Region 1 land, and if it receives any kind of input, then it does need to be sampled every 5 years. There's a number of different ways you could go about doing that. You could either do it all in one go every 5 years, or you could split the eligible fields up into parcels and do, you know, sort of rotate them. So you would do one a year. And that might be a good option because it sort of spreads the cost, not just of the sampling, but also of any amendments or corrections you might need to make over time. But yeah, everything that is eligible needs to have been sampled at least once in the last 5 years by 2028. Samples need to include as a minimum the pH level, phosphate, potash and soil carbon. Either of those two tests for soil carbon are acceptable, but it has to be carried out by a proper lab. You can't just get tests online, and you have to maintain records and any actions that you took as a result of those. It's also recommended that you do test for minerals and trace elements and have a nutrient management plan. At the moment, that's just recommended, but it will be mandatory from 2028. Sadly, there was funding available for this. Probably most of you already know that, and is no longer available at the moment. But FAS emailed me recently to say that they expect that might change in April. So do have a check of their webpage to keep abreast of any of those changes. These are just a few different options that you can use, different labs for soil testing. The ones in bold are all labs that will provide the sort of basic levels of information that you need. I've also put the soil ecology lab on here because we've just recently used them on our farm. But as far as I'm aware, Holly can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure. I think that they will be sort of they're almost an extra. I don't think that they will provide the basic stuff there that you need. And I think that is it for me, which is good. Now we can crack on with Karen's presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to Karen.
You see that all okay? Okay, so hi, welcome. So yeah, today I'm just hopefully going to cover in about 10 minutes, looking at soil health and a whistle-stop tour of sampling, analysis and interpretation. So this is going to be based on best practice rather than the FAS we were just talking about. But we could say just to remind us really, some of this you might think, oh, I already know that, but I always think it's good to get information from various places in various ways and a bit of a reminder sometimes of why we do the things that we need to do. So looking at why soil tests matter, how to take a good sample, what the results mean, and turning data into practical decisions. So looking at why soil testing matters, I think more and more we're starting to realise that soil is a living system and it needs to be a healthy ecological system for it to actually work for us. When you're looking at soil health, you're thinking about, say, 3 legs to it. So the physical structure, the chemical balance, and the biological life. And therefore, if one leg of those 3 fails, then the whole system can collapse. And so we're testing soil. So it's to understand the nutrient levels, to avoid wasting money and potentially damaging the environment by over-applying fertilizer, to improve our crop performance, also to track that soil health over time. So if we are making changes to our practices, to actually see and benchmark that those practices are working and doing what we're hoping they would do. And as in this case, right now it's more and more required for environmental schemes, both government environmental schemes, and now quite often if you're supplying certain retailers, then they're also increasingly asking for this type of information from growers. So taking a good soil sample, so the good data starts in the field. So even if you choose the best lab in the world for analysis, it's pretty useless if that sample is poor. So common problems people often do when sampling is sampling too shallow, sampling in gateways and headlands, not taking enough representative cores across the field, or if you've got really varied soil types, mixing those and sending those off together to be analysed as one. So again, I think most of you know this, but just a good reminder that if you're doing a soil sample yourself and not employing someone on a quad bike, etc., to do it, if you're walking across the field, we want to say, just it's to be representative really. So that W pattern is that representative. Take around 15 to 25 cores, depending on the size of the field. The RB209, which has kind of been the rule book for nutrient management soil analysis for quite a few years now, has always recommended 15 centimetre depth for arable. But I would say with caution, if people are doing more and more kind of minimum tillage or direct drilling, might need to be potentially deeper. And then grassland, the average depth is 7.5 centimetres. But this is mainly at looking at nutrients. If you're needing to also do some kind of soil organic carbon sampling, then the best, say, 30 centimetres is the recommended depth for doing that, which I know is, say, pretty tough to get down to at times, depending on how deep your soil is and how hard it is and what the weather's been like. But say when you are doing that soil sampling, you want to avoid gateways, any dung patches, because obviously that's going to skew your data, and any tram lines, and then say mix those cores into one sample to be then sent off to the lab. This is, say, obviously it says every 5 years, so you can kind of rotate it around under the scheme, but say just from a kind of best practice point of view, it's recommended that any kind of arable fields are tested every 3 to 5 years. If you've got high value crops such as veg that are taking away quite a lot of nutrients at harvest, every 1 to 2 years, and grassland every 4 to 5 years. And say it's obvious that if you take on new land, it's good to benchmark that from the beginning. If any kind of fertility issues appear in your crops, or if you're having any kind of major rotation changes, and then also look at sampling. So typical UK soil tests, again, these are some of the ones that in the scheme are recommended, is looking at your phosphorus, so your P, your potassium, your magnesium, and then more commonly now, wasn't quite so common previously, but people are doing organic matter as a kind of more routine as well. So these are the ones that say provide that kind of chemical fertility baseline. That data, once you've got it, so it's using soil data on farm. So this analysis will help you with your nutrient planning, any liming strategies, how much manure to put on, kind of manage your crop rotations, look at what you need to do to improve the soil if you have got areas where there's issues. And say the most important thing is that consistency, and that data becomes very powerful when you're tracking those hopefully improvements over time. Again, most labs use the index values, so just as a kind of rough idea, when they come back and it says you've got like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 on your kind of potash or phosphorus, this is what it means. So generally, again, it's very contextual depending on the crop and the soil type, etc. But around 2 is normally the target range that you're looking for. And then say pH. pH strongly affects a lot of nutrient availability of other nutrients in your soil. That's why it's important to get it right. And then again, depending on your soil type, but it's say between 6 and 7 most of the time. There are different soil types for that. So those are, say, your potash, phosphate, pH, the kind of run-the-mill samples that you normally send off to a lab. But I just also wanted to mention that some are kind of emerging technology and tools that are coming in. So historically, we've often had to send off to a lab and wait for turnaround time, whereas actually there is emerging technologies coming through now where farmers can actually get real life data in the field. using different equipment. Obviously, I think a lot of these kind of are still quite in the early stages, but there are some really useful apps and tech out there that you can then get the data in the field in real time. So I was just going to briefly mention 3 of these. So the first one's the microbarometer. That gives you, say, fungi bacteria ratio, as well as microbial biomass. There's the Slakes app, which is a free app, and that looks at your aggregate stability, so say the structure of your soil. And then there's also some digital soil sensors on the market. Yeah, so this is me using the microbarometer. Say it's a kit that you buy with people at the same time, and it looks at, say, take a sample. It's kind of got the kit there, and you use an app on your phone, and it gives you an idea, not exact science, but an idea, say, of kind of what your fungi bacteria ratio and microbial biomass is in the soil in real time. I've also got apps like Slake, which I've heard very good things about this app. That, say, again, it's an app where it's free to use. You collect aggregates and dry them, then take pictures on your phone, add water, take photos, and say it lets you know kind of how good that structure in your soil is from that. And the last one, say, I've also had I was involved in a project where we were testing this in the field. It's not, say, it's quite a bit of coding involved, so I wouldn't say it's the most straightforward, easy machine to use, but the concept behind it is really interesting. So it looks at enzymes. So enzymes, I'll say, like but say it helps break down nutrients for plants, and this measures 5 of them, and it kind of say, again, in real time, you can see kind of what your enzymes are. So it's called the SIA Reader EUR3000 Plus, but its nickname is Bob. So this is Bob. I'm sure the others will touch on this briefly as well, but say field observations still really matter. It's not just about sending off and doing tests either in the field or, say, in a lab. It's looking for those, say, earthworms. Obviously, like, more earthworms are a really good indicator of healthy soil. You're looking at your soil structure, so you could do things like your VES, which is your visual evaluation of soil structure, where you dig the hole and break soil down and have a look at how far your roots have come down into that soil profile, how easily it breaks up in your hand, looking for any compaction, and also looking at how easy that water infiltrates through the soil. So, say, like, good crumb structure, so like that kind of typical chocolate cake is what, depending on your soil type, that's ideally what we're looking for. And just that visible biology that you can, like, smell and see that that soil is got enough oxygen and is a living organism. So soil health is a journey. So improving soil health is a gradual process. That's why I say we don't test every year, because it takes a while to prepare that soil and make it healthier again. But say some of the key practices that we can use are diverse rotations. So diverse rotations means that the different crops are bringing different things into that soil, feeding at different depths, getting roots down to break up that soil structure. Cover crops, so that we don't leave that soil bare, so that the creatures living in the soil and the microbes are being fed year round, and we reduce the risk of losing that soil through erosion. Organic amendment, so again, just adding that, say, lots of things back into that soil, like manures and composts. And so the living roots as well, there's been a lot more research recently showing that the living roots also have as big of effect, if not more, than adding things like FYM into the soil. Reduce disturbance, so making sure we're not, say, breaking up the soil too much. We don't say, again, it's contextual. We're not saying never plough, but it's just thinking about, say, reducing the movement of that soil, so we're not breaking up those fungi networks and disturbing worms and life in the soil. And then lastly, the livestock integration. So livestock does have benefits for soil, things like obviously adding the FYM and the nutrients, as well as that seed contact, grazing down, for it to then grow up and put deeper roots. But say, I think the main message is that, say, obviously the monitoring of it and that consistent monitoring helps measure the progress. I've nearly finished. We've got a really good resource. We're doing a bunch of technical guides at the moment within the farm and land use team. Some practical guides on lots of different practices and subjects. And this one is kind of what is my soil analysis report telling me. So I was very proud of myself earlier in the technology of managing to put a QR code on there. So if you want to scan that, if you can't find it by scanning it, if you do just Google soil analysis report telling me soil association, hopefully it will come up on Google as well. That's got a really good kind of like simple traffic light system of like red, green, amber of different results when you're doing soil analysis. So yeah, just to summarize key takeaways, because that was a lot of information in a very short space of time. But so good soil data starts with good sampling, so making sure you're doing it correct in the field. Lab results need careful interpretation. So again, it's that, what does this mean? And the so what, it's always the so what. You've kind of got that in front of you. What does that actually mean in practice on the ground for you? Soil health has got 3 legs to it. So it says the biology, the chemistry, and the structure, and we need to be looking at all 3 of those. So again, you can combine lab tests, but you also need those on the ground field observations, the ground check as well. And it is just tracking that over time. And if not for anything else, just to kind of motivate you that everything you're doing and the time you're putting in is actually making a difference, and you can visually see that. So yeah, but that's my contact address at Soil Association. So if I've completely confused you on anything, or you've got any further questions or want clarification, then please feel free to reach out to me. Okay.
Thanks very much, Karen. That was really great. Yeah, covered a lot of different stuff there.
It's a very short space of time.
Yes. But yeah, no, great job. We haven't had any questions in the chat, but so I think we'll crack on onto Philip's presentation, and we can, if people have questions, they can put them in after. So yeah, if you want to stop sharing, and then Philip can start.
Yeah.
Okay, just going to start sharing my screen, I hope. Can everybody see my slide?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Philip.
Okay. I'll give you a bit of context where I came from. I grew up on a small farm in Ireland. It was principally dairy, and we did grow our own crops, our own barley for feeding our cows, and kept a lot of our calves for beef. My journey into soil imbalance, if you'd like to say that, started. I came home from agriculture college full of yield and fertilizers and chemicals, and decided I was going to burst the farm with loads more milk. So I loaded up the farm with chicken manure, because there was a hen laying business not too far from me. So for 2 winters I drew farmyard or chicken manure onto the farm and absolutely blackened the farm, and I had grass coming out of places on the farm we didn't think we could grow grass. So that was great. I thought, yeah, I've got a nice green farm now. We're on a roll until, the soil I did soil tests, and it showed low pH, so I needed lime, and low phosphate and low nitrogen, low everything really. So I thought the chicken manure, that'll cure it with our own slurry and with our own farmyard manure. However, in doing that, I absolutely put everything out of balance, and I ran into infertility problems in cows, and they would be fine once they're on a ration in the winter, and silage hit the grass and they just fell apart. So that nearly broke me for a year or two. We figured out that we had locked up all kinds of minerals like copper and molybdenum. So thanks to a really good vet, we supplemented everything heavily, and we got everything back on track. But that, unbeknownst to myself, I didn't really know what I was doing with the soil, but I had imbalanced it by loading up manure on it, just too much, too soon. So that was my introduction to imbalanced soils, but I took no heed of it, of course. So just move on to the next slide. Oops, too far. So yeah, after about 20 years of farming in Ireland and mixed various contracting and diversity, we decided to sell up and move out to Canada, as I saw some great opportunities out there. And I always wanted to have a grain farm. So out we went and bought a couple of thousand acres. And this is actually a picture of one of our fields. So we had, yeah, it was large scale ag. I thought it was away at the races by now by doing this. Big learning curve. First couple of years were fantastic. We big machinery, too big to fit in our sheds even. And we got into, as you can see, there's GPS on the combine. We got into a lot of tech on the farm. We were mapping the fields, yield monitors. We were variable rating fertilizer, variable rating our chemicals, our fungicide, variable rating our seed. And yet after a couple of years, after 3 or 4 years, we were making, good profits, but yet we were starting to use more and more chemical. And while our fertilizer was sort of staying stable, but our chemical use was going up, especially pesticide use. We began getting problems like grasshoppers, aphids and whatnot. And I decided, this seemed to be a slippery slope, a trend here I didn't like. So, as I say, on the surface, farming was flying. We had put up new grain stores, and this is a fertilizer bin. Like the realization of big ag started coming in when we were buying truckloads of fertilizer by 42-ton load and buying chemicals in 1,000-liter totes instead of 5-liter totes. This is one of our fertilizer bins. This is a kind of a warning shot. The ladder on the fertilizer bin was red, which to me is a warning. On the grain bins, it was black. So that was kind of a warning shot straight off. Yeah, in the mid sort of teens, 2013, 14, we discovered something called Regen Ag. I started going to some meetings, and there was people talking about integrating livestock, and we thought, well, that's not going to happen because we'd have to build about 10 miles of fencing. And anyway, as far as I'm concerned, I'd kind of done the whole stock rearing thing and the dairying, so I didn't want to go there. I was happy on my tractor in the field, doing what I was doing, but I just didn't like the chemical side. So we had some issues with soil. There was hard pans. I tried subsoiling. That lasted a couple of years to good effects, but nothing was lasting. Anything we did nothing was sort of staying put. So we moved. We started realizing that our own health was actually beginning to suffer. And when we moved from a dairy farm and had our own produce into what was big ag, and even walking into the supermarket, the first thing you meet was the aisles of drugs, and then a pharmacy at the end of those aisles, and then you moved on to the food. So this is, and again, everything was exaggerated because, of course, it's big scale. It's North America, and people's health. We noticed that the local health was not great. We went in Saskatchewan. We went to a seminar on a whole conference on Regen Ag, and there's a doctor there called Dr. Don Huber. He spoke for about an hour and a half, and he's an expert on glyphosate. He's a physician and has been for a long time. He's done a lot of research into glyphosate. And we were using glyphosate for desiccating because we're mostly min-tails, so we're spraying off any weeds before we sowed. We were using it as a desiccant for pre-harvest and some crops sometimes.
I'm interested in getting some worms for my garden.
Then hear Don Huber speak.
And it has decimated my worm population.
Somebody's mic is on, I think. Yeah. So yeah, after speaking, I listened to Don Huber speak for an hour and a half, and as you see from this chart, when Roundup or glyphosate were introduced in the 70s and farmers started using it extensively, the health of the general public in North America, well, you can see from the graph, there was a direct correlation between birth defects, Alzheimer's, yeah, it was very, really scary. And this all kind of brought home the whole realization of what we were doing with their chemicals on a large scale. When he stopped talking after an hour and a half, there was, you could hear a pin drop in the room. There's about 150 of us sitting in this room, and everybody, you could just tell everybody had this guilt complex right away, and we all sat and just looked at the desk for probably, felt like about 5 minutes, but it was probably 10 seconds, if even that. So that's at the point we decided we had to change what we were up to. That's when we started using biologicals. We put a liquid kit on the drill. We found some guys who were making great compost. He pioneered a compost extract machine, and 2 or 3 of us got together, put liquid kits on our drills, put this fantastic biological extract into these drills, and absolutely blocked up everything. Filtration was a bit of a problem. The idea was fantastic, but it was early days with extracts, and we got to the point where we threw everything off the drills, waited a year or 2 to calm down till our memories lost, and then we put them back on again and started tweaking things a little bit more. But the biology we were using was absolutely fantastic, but we carried on using our chemicals, and still we were having problems with insects and having to use a lot of pesticides. So problem was we weren't understanding our soils. We were putting in cover crops. We had a neighbor come in doing cattle grazing, and still we weren't finding any increase in soil health. And then we discovered Dr. Elaine Ingham, who sadly passed away a few weeks ago. But we found her course, and that just joined all the dots. Then we understood what we were doing that was harmful, why, and we had no idea what biology was underneath the soil. So we did Elaine Ingham's foundation course, and that absolutely brought it all home to us. And we somewhat knew what we were going to do then. At this stage, COVID was coming in, or had come in, and we were already thinking of moving back to Europe and gathering all the family back together in Europe, as we were kind of all scattered around the world. And as we've been joining the dots of human health and soil health, our whole family became interested, and we decided to make the decision to come back to Europe, and ended up in Fife, thankfully. So after we purchased our microscope, we came to Fife and purchased a farm, not thousands of acres like we had been, but we're back to what we figured was a manageable experimental farm, if you like. Got back into making compost. It's our extract machine. Some of our on screen here on some of our samples. So what we're doing now is we have 100 acres. It's all grass. We've introduced livestock. We did some soil tests on the farm when we began, just a standard, and it was the usual bacteria dominated. It had low pH. We needed lime. We did the Haney test, and we did our own biological test. So we decided to introduce livestock, and within 3 years we did nothing but the farm except introduce the cattle, and then the hens came later. And even the first year we checked the grass species, and we had about four or five grass species. After 2 or 3 years of livestock grazing, and we did adaptive grazing, Conrad was taking care of that, our son. We had an increase in even grass species of up to 16. Then just to decided we improve our grasslands, so we put the plough in and decided to go herbal lays. And Alex did our soil testing, our biological soil testing. So we did a before and after test. And even when the plough went in, I decided to plough it because the fields were extremely level and needed leveling up for future machinery working. Everything we'd gained in the 2 or 3 years with the livestock, we destroyed with the plough for reseeding. But with our compost and amendments, I think we can pull that back pretty fast. This is a picture of our herbal lays we introduced last year. Massive difference in the cattle performance on these. They kind of went from, we weigh our cattle every week, and they've gone from about 0.7, 0.8 daily live weight gain up to 1.5 to 2. So in our minds, yeah, even though we are destroying the biology we've gained in a few years, we will gain it back with our amendments and injecting our extracts. Some of the resources that we gain our knowledge from. Dr. Don Huber was a massive influence on us, of course. Elaine Ingham absolutely set us up for life for gaining soil knowledge. John Kempf, Gabe Brown, Nicole Masters, Zach Bush, Dr. Alan Williams, and Dan Kittredge have been fantastic influence for us and our education into our soil and our health. So on the farm now, basically we've our cover crops, we have our cattle, we have sheep, selling direct to market. We do soil analysis for other people. Alex is on that on the microscope. So while we're helping ourselves, we're happy to help other people as well with whatever experience we have, and hopefully move forward on our own education. So that's it for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip. That's really great to hear your story and your journey and everything that's happened and where you are now. It's really inspiring. I can't see any questions specifically for you in the chat. There is one for Karen, but I'm going to hold off on that for a sec just because I want to ask you a couple of questions. I just wanted to ask about the tests that Alex is doing. Could you talk a bit more detail about the tests that he's doing with his microscope? What's he, you said you had reversed everything that you'd done in those 2 years by ploughing. What was your, measurement for that to be true?
Right. So we take our soil samples in the methods that Karen was mentioning there, mix them all together, and Alex takes that sample bag and takes a sample of makes several slides by taking 1 milliliter of the soil mixed up, adding 5 milliliters of water, and that makes a nice solution and takes 1 drop of that solution, puts it under a microscope, and this will give us a representative sample by maybe doing 4 or 5 slides of that 1 sample of soil. Now, in that microscope, on that slide, he can measure bacteria, nematodes, fungi, amoeba. What am I missing? All the kind of biology in the soil that's alive, the livestock in the soil. We have an app then, a spreadsheet, then when we put in the numbers of the measurements of those, it gives us a printout and gives us, if you like, an example, a side-by-side example of what the optimum levels are in the soil and what are actually in the soil at the moment. And then we can tailor the compost and amendments to suit the results of the slide.
Okay, that's interesting. And what's the software or?
It came with Dr. Elaine's Soil Food Web course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
cool.
It's specific to her course. Yeah.
And that's the testing that you guys offer as well to other farmers.
Correct.
Interesting. Okay, great. Thanks. And I had another question, which was more sort of, going back to your farm in Canada. It felt like you were on a journey there and then you came back here. I'm just wondering, if you had stayed in Canada, what would you have changed about your farm to improve the soil health there or your farming methods there?
We would have gone out and bought that 10 miles of cattle fencing for starters.
Okay.
Because a grain only situation is very difficult. but not impossible. But having Conrad interested in the cattle, so we would have obviously gone that route. We would have, after we found Dr. Elaine Ingham, we would have done a much more intensive, but we didn't really have time and all the time, because by the time we found her, we were kind of in leaving mode anyway. But we would have for sure began making composts, injecting them into the soil with our already established liquid equipment. And also we did dabble a little bit in cover crops, and we would have gone down the road of companion cropping for sure.
Undersowing the grain.
Undersowing, yeah. And also in the equipment we had, we could sow 1 or 2 crops, or even 3, all at the same time with the drill kit we had, basically inter-row. So that for sure we would have gone down that road.
Okay, interesting. Thanks very much. That's great. So yeah, then there's just a question for you, Karen, in the chat, which is a good one. I don't know if you want to answer that now.
Yeah, I can do. So so I wouldn't say the lab size, obviously the standard analysis that we've been doing is necessarily wrong, but it is only part of the picture. Like, you're absolutely right from that point of view. It is what's chemically available in a moment of time. If you've got, say, a very kind of healthy soil full of microbes that are turning over, like making those nutrients available, then it could definitely underestimate how much nutrients are available for the plant. So because it just doesn't give the full picture. You need, say, looking at other things alongside that to kind of monitor your soil, how healthy it is and where it's going.
Great, thanks, Karen. That's really good. And then there's a couple of questions for you, Philip, now. We'll just do these 2 before we move on to Holly's. Asking if you could please say a wee bit more about how you make your compost and inject it into the soil, and how do you quality control your compost as well? Okay,
so following Elaine Ingham's system, we have a compost turner, we have a extractor, and we can brew our teas. So we use our own farmyard manure, and we're transitioning into organic actually since last December. So all our manure there's no chemicals in it or fungicides or anything. So we use our own farmyard manure, wood chip, and we grow clover silage as a nitrogen source, as a heating source. So the compost, we mix it up with our front end loader and a grab as best we can. Maybe sometimes we'd add straw as well if we need some more woody material. Half the material in the compost row is wood chip. The rest then is proportioned out between the manure and the silage. Our aim is to get the pile, we mix it up with the compost turner, with a little separate pellet compost turner. I mix it, run it through 2 or 3 times just to get it all mixed up. Our aim is to get the center of the pile heated to between 60 and 70 degrees Celsius within 3 days. That heat will kill all the pathogens. We'll turn it about 2 or 3 times. Once it hits that temperature, we'll turn it. It'll come back into, if we've done our mixing right, it'll come back into the heat zone between 60 and 70 within a day or so. We'll leave it there for 2 or 3 days, turn it again, and repeat that a 3rd time. And with the way the compost turner works, it'll make sure that the center of all the material has been in the center for the heating process, and that heating process is extremely important to kill the pathogens and any weed seeds that we don't want in there. So that's the first part of the quality control. Making our extracts, then we'll take, we have a GOT extract producer. It's basically works on bubbling air through a sack of compost. Takes about 20 minutes to make 500 liters. And then we'll spray that with a special sprayer. It's a low impact, if you like, on the biology. We'll spray that on the crops, or preferably try and get it into the soil on our liquid kit on our seed drill. If that answers the question, I hope.
Thanks, Philip. Sounds like you've got all the gear, so that's helpful.
We do.
There's another question there about the JADAM amendment, but I'm going to hang off on that for a sec just so that Holly can do her presentation and then we can come back to that at the end if that's okay. Just so I'm conscious of time. So I'll pass over to Holly.
Thanks, Connie. Thank you, Karen and Philip. Super excited to hear more about what you're doing, Philip. Let me just share my screen. Can you all see my presentation?
Yeah, that looks great. Thanks, Holly.
Okay, great. So I'm taking a little bit of a step out and kind of looking at soil health and how it fits into the whole farm plan. I guess I was reflecting on where all this started. As I mentioned at the start, I work for East Market Garden. I'm a grower. I've been a grower for a while now on a market garden scale, and I also work for the Seed Sovereignty Programme. So I'm a veg grower and I'm a seed grower and I'm a seed geek and I'm a soil nerd. And I used to think that these two things were quite separate until I had a light bulb moment quite a few years ago now and realised how completely and utterly everything is connected. Everything exists in relationship to everything else. And I feel that we can't start to address the health of the soil on our farms and in our crofts without taking into account the ways we and all the other living things around us and below our feet, including seed, interacts with the soil. Several years ago, I was really fortunate enough to do the CREATE programme with Nicole Masters. It was an agroecological coaching programme that spanned over 8 months. And she introduced us to the concept of the 5 M's, which I'd like to talk to you about this evening. And I found them fundamental to understanding these relationships that I just mentioned and unpicking what is really going on with our soil health. We use the 5 M's to diagnose where limiting factors are in our system and how we can address these to improve soil health and therefore whole system health. And the 5 M's are management, mindset, minerals, microbes, and bear with me, organic matter. Snuck that one in under an M. Now, first and foremost, when it comes to soil health, for me, context is everything. Because as I've mentioned, everything is interconnected. And we've heard about some fantastic approaches to getting to know our soil better this evening already, but I'm a firm believer that there isn't a one-size-fits-all recipe to solving a problem, particularly when it comes to soil health. We're all often looking for that silver bullet, but rarely does one exist, or if one does, it certainly isn't a permanent solution. Because life is dynamic. And part of the journey towards soil health is shifting our mindset into thinking about our landscapes holistically and understanding how everything is interconnected. Because what works on one farm might have a detrimental effect on another. And this is where we can really become empowered by understanding our own specific contexts and what is achievable within those. And how do we do this? Well, a great place to start is to dig some holes. Now, Karen mentioned earlier about observation, and I think that's key to understanding what's going on beneath our feet. Dig some holes, look at your soil, smell it, really get to know it, and really get to know it throughout the year. I feel this is the single most powerful action you can take in soil health management. And what are you looking for when you're digging those holes? Well, fundamentally, we want good soil structure. We want that luscious aggregation because that allows for gas exchange, water infiltration, and provides habitat for a diversity of life. Good soil structure is the result of interactions between chemical, biological, and physical factors in the soil, as Karen mentioned, but it's also the result of management. So to achieve those highly functional soils with good structure and deep aggregation, we need to ensure that our management practices aren't hindering this. And to better understand how your management practices might be impacting soil structure, I'd suggest digging holes in different parts of your farm. Somewhere you regularly cultivate, for example, or then in a verge or a hedgerow, because that will give you a really good idea of what rested and undisturbed soil might look like. And that will give you a baseline something to compare more managed areas to. And then it's really important to get curious and reflect on what management practices could be causing the differences that you're seeing. Getting to know your soil is really important. So dig those holes and understand what's going on below your feet, but do it year round, not just as a one-off occurrence. And we also need to know about the minerals in our soil. Now, we've talked a lot about soil testing already in this webinar, but testing is a way to get to understand what nutrients are available in your soil. Soil testing tells us about the rocks, or as I like to think about them, the bones of the landscape. But really, this is only relevant if we know how the biology and the plants are interacting with those bones. So alongside your soil test, I'd also recommend getting a bioanalysis, as Philip mentioned, a bioassay of your soil to see what microbes are active. And I'd also think about getting a plant tissue test, because this can be invaluable, or if you can stretch to it, they're quite expensive, a regular sap analysis of your plants, because this will give you a real holistic overview to see what's actually being made available to your plants in the soil, what they might be able to uptake, and how this might be in fact impacting your overall soil and plant health. Again, it's about connecting those dots and understanding how everything is interacting. And this was touched on earlier, but an important thing I'd flag to look at in these soil tests is your organic matter levels. And even more important to understand is what's happening to that organic matter. Because you can have high organic matter levels, but if it's just sitting there, not being cycled or transformed into stable forms of carbon, then it's essentially defunct. So by having that microbe analysis, that bioassay, and knowing what biology is present in your soil, this can be a great indicator of whether that organic matter is going to go anywhere, if it's going to start being cycled. Now, I really appreciate it's easy to get bogged down in lots of these tests and numbers, but to reassure you that just through using those observation skills and intuition, you can get a good idea of your soil health. So back to digging those holes again, we can assess how much life is thriving in our soil and how it's interacting with our crops just by digging up a few plants and looking at the roots. Now, the rhizosphere is the area immediately surrounding the plant roots. It's directly influenced by plant exudates and the interactions with that microbiology that I mentioned earlier. And this is a really good indicator, because a healthy photosynthesizing plant will be producing an abundance of exudates. It will be pumping loads of sugars into that soil, which in turn facilitates healthy microbial interaction in the root zone. And this will be really obvious because you'll see these luscious roots that are coated in soil and that lovely dark humus. And what I really want to emphasize is that plants are key players in all of this. Long gone are the days of thinking that plants are passive entities when it comes to soil health. They don't just simply uptake nutrients that are dissolved in soil water. They're active participants in this soil health story. We now know that plants have complex relationships with the biology in the soil. They form vital relationships with soil health to enable them to mine nutrients, build their immune systems, survive all the environmental stresses like flooding and drought, and even communicate to each other. Through some amazing research, we now know that the interactions between plants and soil biology can provide almost all of a plant's nutritional needs. Plants, like us, have a microbiome and rely on other living beings to survive and thrive. And even more exciting for a seed geek like me is that this microbiome is passed on to the next generation of the plant through the seed. Essentially, the microbiome is passed on by the parent plant, setting its offspring up with all the essential microbial partners that it needs to help it in turn build a healthy microbiome itself and build those healthy soils. And this will allow those plants to thrive. So through saving some of our own seed, we can be continuing to build both plant and soil health. Now, I hope what I'm making clear is that everything is interconnected. Knowing about the minerals in your soil is irrelevant unless you also know about the microbes. And knowing about the microbes is kind of irrelevant unless you also know about how your management practices might influence these microbes, maybe whether they have a home or not. So we need to be thinking about all of these relationships when approaching soil health. A problem can have multiple causes, and there is often not one solution. And the 5 M's approach encourages us to think about all of the relationships in our system and can guide us in making decisions about soil management. So what action can we take? Well, as I mentioned, everything will be very specific to your own context, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. But there are some general practices, some that have already been mentioned in this webinar, that you can aspire to when addressing overall soil health. When we're looking at building organic matter, as a general practice, using really diverse green manures or cover crops, having those roots in the ground year round to feed, house and build those underground communities is an all-round win. We want to be maximising photosynthesis year round to get as many root exudates into the soil, but also to protect it, to prevent erosion and to help build good soil structure. Winter cover crops can be a really quick win for this because they're vital in protecting soil over winter when there's lots of erratic weather conditions. And in terms of those microbes, well, we can stimulate biology. It's not always about adding more microbes. Sometimes it's about stimulating and feeding what's there. Obviously, getting a bioassay to establish what's in your soil is really, really helpful. But you can also generally encourage existing life to flourish through using things like Johnson Sioux, compost extracts, and also vermicast extracts, and maybe biopriming our seed or seedlings with these inoculants, and stimulating biology through foliar feeding our crops. And when you've had those soil tests and a mineral or nutrient deficiency has been identified, or something is fundamentally lacking in the soil test, we can consider offering trace minerals, maybe in potting mix or providing them in those foliar feeds that I just mentioned, but especially at critical times in a plant's life cycle. But these should be very bespoke and very specific to your site and its conditions. Someone mentioned Jadam, I think, in the comments, but homemade ferments can also really help to address some of these deficiencies. But also be aware that if this nutrient isn't already in your soil or in the plants on your site, then it won't occur in your ferments. So that's where using weeds and other herbs can really help us, because they've got really fantastic mining capabilities. And so we can turn a problem weed into something that's more of a solution. I would really advise to start bricks testing your crops, because it's a great monitoring practice and helps us in our management. It really helps you to get to know your crops and how they're photosynthesizing. It's basically a method of measuring the dissolved sugars and solids that are present in a plant. It's an observation technique more than a definitive indicator, and it's really most useful for trending, for understanding the impact of your actions. So you could use it after you've done a foliar feed, for example, to see if it's had any effect. It's really helping you understand how your management practices are influencing your soil health. But also just to emphasize that you don't need any of these fancy tools, because you can just use your instincts and things like your taste, because we can really taste when crops are nutritionally dense and that when they're doing well. And something close to my heart, we can consider how we interact with seeds, because they're alive and they carry with them all those wonderful microbes that we've been talking about. So avoid sterilizing your seed or buying coated seed, and ideally start saving some of your own, or connecting with other farmers who you could share or trade local seed with, because purely through saving seed, we're helping pass on that microbiome to the next generation and contributing to our soil health. Finally, trust, I guess, and being open to change, to me, are keys to success. Because our own mindset can be one of the most powerful tools for developing healthy and abundant soils, and ultimately healthy and abundant plants and people. So stay curious. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Holly. That was really great. Yeah, great to have everybody's really different areas of expertise on show. Yeah, there's time for a few questions. I just have one for you, which is foliar feeding is something that I think is becoming more, more commonly done. And maybe in the past, we didn't quite understand how we sort of thought you have to, especially in organics, feed the soil to feed the plant. And so foliar feeding is kind of, maybe you can just explain a bit about how it actually works and how it's not necessarily that you're forgetting about the soil, it's actually still contributing to, maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's going back to the idea that kind of plants are the engineers of our soil, really. And if we're feeding the plants, they're feeding the soil and the life in the soil, everything, I sound like a stuck record, but everything is connected. So it's a way of kind of feeding the plants so that then they can be becoming their best selves, that they're maximizing their photosynthesis, their potential. And then when they're healthy and photosynthesizing at their maximum capacity, then they're going to be releasing a lot of those plant exudates that I mentioned into the soil, which then feeds the microbiology, which then builds the soil, creates that life, and is increasing the aggregation, all the things I've talked about. So it's all connected. And I think foliar feeding is a real, really excellent tool to use as part of your soil health approach.
Great, thanks so much. That's really helpful. We have got a long question here, which I'm trying to read really quickly, from David. I think maybe it's a comment actually, rather than a question. So I'll just leave that there. Nigel, have you raised your hand to ask a question? You'll have to unmute yourself. Doesn't look like I can. If you're able to pop your question in the chat, then we'll definitely come to it. Sorry, I can't. I don't know why we can't hear you. There's a question there about where to get sap squeezing pliers or grips for a bricks test. I'm not sure I can answer that.
Garlic crusher.
Yeah.
Stick with the garlic crusher. I tried the flat pliers. The garlic crusher is the best.
Okay, great, thanks. Karen, did you want to ask a question?
I did actually. I wanted to ask a question to Philip, if that's okay.
Yeah. Go for it.
You mentioned, Philip, that on your kind of journey on your soil health and improving the soil health and the biology, that you also kind of became interested in the impact on human health. And I was just wondering, from a personal interest point of view, because I love the overlap between the two, if you also changed anything kind of health-wise and what you did for your own gut microbiome alongside the soil.
Yes, got back to eating whole foods. When we went to Canada, we became very conscious of food over processed, because we thought, okay, when it leaves the farm, nutrient density is probably not very exciting because of the way we're growing it. But we definitely went back to our home garden, nutrient testing. We became more aware of nutrient density, if you like, of the foods. So we became more careful about what we purchased. Very much going back to the whole foods, raw milk, sourdough bread, and whatever we can produce in our own garden, certainly. But if whatever we can't, we purchase organically, outside the home, if you like. So yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. There's a, sorry, Holly, did you want to ask something?
Yeah, no, sorry, I just something popped into my head that earlier you were talking about soil tests in the soil ecology lab, and I just wanted to flag that they will cover everything that I think is required, and they will offer bioassays, and yeah, they're really great at advising things as well. So as Philip mentioned, there's lots of folks around that can do these bioassays for you, and then you can also combine them with soil tests as well.
That's helpful, thanks. Yeah, I wasn't sure about that because it wasn't so clear on their website, but you should, get in touch. They sound good. Thanks for typing your question there, Nigel. Does any of the three presenters want to tackle that very large question?
Stay away from it.
Ideally, there would be, hey, but I don't know how that all works. Do you know, Karen?
Yeah, so obviously, like Severn Trent or local water utilities companies do recycle waste certainly onto land, and they do say test for things like toxic metals and etc. in it, but I don't know how closely it actually is monitored. I know that things like phosphate can sometimes be the limiting factor, but again, it's just the source of what comes. It's obviously not allowed, it's not permitted in organic systems because you just can't guarantee where that source has come from. So potentially has a place in issue with finite phosphate, but I think it needs to be more carefully managed in the source of it and how we actually apply it to the soil and what we're testing for when we do it as well, because again, it's just the source of it that is the contentious issue, and the pathogens.
Great. If you use such waste, you need to check with the buyer report. Yes. So are there any other questions before we do a final sort of wrap up? Maybe if you could, Karen, please put the feedback form in the chat, then people could be filling that out just in the last couple of minutes. If we have any other questions. Yeah, the feedback form is really helpful because it helps us think about what other topics people are interested in hearing about. We're starting a new project called Upscaling Agroecology, looking at lots of different topics to do with agroecology in Scotland. So let us know what you want to hear about. Let's go for the, sorry, I did forget about your Jadam question. Would you like to, anyone of the three speakers want to tackle the Jadam one?
I have a little bit of experience with Jadam and various other, as I mentioned, using different ferments and plant extracts. I think, again, it's really dependent on your context and what is appropriate for you, but I definitely know some farms that have had real success using Jadam. Yeah, I think give it a go.
Philip, do you know anything about it?
Not a whole pile, and honestly, nope. It probably sounds like a good idea, but it's contextual and be careful what's in it, I suppose. That's all I can say.
Yeah, that sounds sensible. Without exogenous inputs, are you suggesting that your systems can be self-sustaining with your own farm? I guess that's a big question, isn't it? Do you want to think about that one, Holly?
I mean, that's the dream, isn't it? The reality is farming is it's not a natural process. It's something we are constantly taking, and there are limiting factors that need to be addressed, and I'm not adverse to addressing those limiting factors by bringing inputs in if they fit within organic and agroecological systems. I think it's, again, to go back to context, but I think it really depends on your context, and if you're fortunate enough to have resources that you can draw upon on your land to close those loops and create all your own inputs, and that's incredible. I think it's not everyone isn't as fortunate as that, but working towards that is definitely a goal.
Yeah, I would sort of tend to agree. As a farmer, I also feel that way, but I also feel kind of like what Holly was saying. We are really connected to lots of other things. We're not our own little island, you know, we're connected to the wider estate that we're on, who can give us straw or manure or wood chip, and we're part of a bigger area, you know, and the council collects food waste and then generates PAS 100 compost that maybe makes sense for us to use as part of our rotation and fertility on the farm. And I think, you know, yeah, we're like you say, we're all connected, and as much as possible, it's nice to do things on the farm. But David Finley's got a final question here. I was hoping the panel might like to comment on my experience with our soil crop animal interactions. Oh yes. Has everyone had a chance to read that point? After 30 years of not applying phosphate, my soil analysis tells me my soil is now severely deficient in plant available phosphate. But our silage yields are now as good as they ever were when we applied 100 tons of soluble compound fertilizers and 15 tons of triple superphosphate. Even better, we are in copper, cobalt, and selenium deficient soil. Always had to supplement. So it looks like what you're saying is all the outcomes seem pretty good, but the analysis is telling you that you're severely deficient. And is there a way to make sense of that?
Fungi.
Yeah.
Mining. I think, yeah, phosphates. It's Dr. Christine Jones, I think, it says that, you know, there's enough in the soil. It's just about opening it up. So if we're approaching your soil health and creating practices that are increasing that microbial life, especially fungi, to be able to access that, then that's where that's coming from. And the conventional soil test might not be reflective of exactly what's going on in your soil, which is why having all of these different assays and using observation and digging holes are also important to get that holistic overview to understand what's going on.
Yeah, it sounds as if, yeah, it's not the full picture, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as just as Holly says, she's hit the nail on the head. To emphasize the tests that you are reading, you've got to be really careful what the tests are actually doing and how they're performed. There are tests and there are tests. So, but they've really got to be biologically based and to some degree, and if and mineral based. There are tests that are showing what's in the soil but not available. So we just, yeah, be careful which test you are applying.
That's I think that's a really great place to leave it. So thank you so much to all of our really brilliant speakers this evening, and thank you everyone for attending. We will send out the follow-up email in a few days with links to all the resources that we've mentioned, and links to maybe some of the places that do this kind of testing as well. And yeah, please do fill out the feedback form because that's really helpful for us. And yeah, thank you very much.